story I'm going to share with you took place in the North Pole, Alaska in the early 2000s of May. The incident I'm going to describe to you was definitely wrong place, wrong time, and completely unprovoked, which no one believes. Another note, I was still only 20 when this incident occurred and could not legally own a pistol yet. Also, I was in the army, and if you live in the barracks, you have to keep your weapons in the arms room. So it's really not convenient to get it out and carry as compared to a guy living off post who can keep his in a gun safe in the closet. I know people wonder why I wasn't carrying, those are the reasons. Anyway, here's my story. On the night of Cinco de Mayo, I attended a party at a friend's house in the North Pole, Alaska. North Pole is about 20 to 30 minutes outside of Fairbanks. It's a somewhat rural community, lots of houses that are on 1, 2 acre lots, mostly all dirt roads off the main road. I was a designated driver that night and drove four of my friends, but three of the friends that I brought decided they were going to spend the night at the person's house instead of going back to the barracks. Only one friend that wasn't drinking a lot decided that he wanted to go back to the barracks when I was ready to go. We ended up leaving at about 1:30 in the morning. As we're pulling into the front gate, we got a call that there had been a fight at the party. They said after the fight, everyone was going home instead of staying the night and continue drinking. They asked us to come back and pick them up, but they said they had went to a different friend's house that lived in the same area because everyone had to leave after the fight. Well, GPS doesn't work that well once you get outside of Fairbanks and aren't on the main roads. At least not my shitty Verizon service that night. You could get in the general area, but not always the exact location. When we went to the address that was given, it came up as being in the middle of the road. So we took a turn down the side road to turn and try and get some service so we could make a call to figure out where the house was. By this time it was around 2:30 in the morning. As we turned down the road, there was an old red minivan with fog lights mounted on top, just idling there with two guys that looked to be in their late 20s inside. I remember thinking that it looked like something you'd see in a TV show or a horror movie. Just a really creepy looking van, especially at almost 3 in the morning. We had to pass them to turn around, and they looked at us in a way that gave us a really bad feeling. So we turned around and then had to pass them again to pull out onto the main road. As we passed them, the driver was leaning his head out of the window like he wanted us to stop so he could ask for something. Being it was almost 3 in the morning, we knew it was probably best to keep driving. My friend wasn't able to get a hold of anyone, so he tried mapping it out again. The GPS was delayed due to our poor service, and we missed the turn once again. We saw a small clearing to pull over, so we pulled over on the side of the road to verify where we were at compared to the street we missed. About 10 seconds later, the red minivan with fog lights pulled up next to me on my driver's side, and I rolled down the window. I rolled mine down, and they initiated conversation by asking if we had seen a white Dodge pickup. We said we hadn't, and they said, okay, thanks. We then asked if they knew where Meadow Rue, the street that we were looking for, was. They said it was the first street on the left. We headed back the way we just came. We were suspicious, but when we looked at the GPS, it showed the road. We found out later that the road was on both sides of the main road. No, locals outside Fairbanks tend not to like the active duty military guys. And the military guys stick out a lot due to the lack of beard, long hair, and having the military haircut. So, we started heading towards Meadow Rue, which is about a half mile, and saw them pull out and start heading that way behind us. We made the turn into what we thought was Meadow Rue, and this road was a bumpy dirt road and immediately forks off into two directions. One side goes straight and up a slight hill, the other side is off to the left and drops down about 2 feet and then flattens out. We turned left and dropped down a small incline. The road was narrow, only big enough for one car, and lined with trees on both sides for a good distance. The first thing we noticed was a dead-end sign, and that's when we started to get worried. We drove about 20 feet, and then we see the minivan with fog lights turn in and drop down behind us. At this point, my blood turned cold, and I felt that sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew at this point they were following us. I tried to be positive and hoped for a split second they'd hang back and turn off at the first driveway, which we hadn't seen a driveway yet. But then I saw them speeding up. And again, this is a bumpy dirt side street, There's no reason to be going that fast. I started speeding up too, and they slammed in the back of my car, backed off, and then ran me again. A few seconds later, we made it to a small clearing like a dirt cul-de-sac. I had enough room to pull forward and then reverse myself back so that I was facing the direction I had just came. While I was doing this, they stopped and blocked the one-lane dirt road. They hopped out of the car and one of them shouted, "This ain't Meadow Room, motherfucker. Get the fuck out of the car." The one guy had positioned himself directly in front of my car, about 10 to 15 feet away between the trees and his van. The other guy started walking up to my passenger side where my friend was, and they kept shouting at us to get out, but I just gunned it right at the guy in front of me trying to run him over. He managed to jump out of the way. I thought for sure there wouldn't be enough room between his van and the trees, and figured we'd get stuck, but we had no guns, so there was no better choice. I thought we'd have to bail out and run into the woods and hide, but to my surprise, we squeezed through. It was such a tight fit that both my mirrors collapsed in. Then I sped out of there, got onto the main road, and headed home. I had seen a state trooper not long before all of this, not too far down the road. I was scared to death of being chased again and then run off the road at higher speeds. So instead of slowing down, I blew past a state trooper while doing 90 in a 45. Since it was extreme speeding, I thought I'd get the trooper's attention, but for whatever reason, it didn't. There was only one turn on the whole way back, and when I slowed down to make it, the van was nowhere in sight. I still flew back at 90 miles an hour all the way just to be safe. The next day, we tried to tell our friends what had happened, but nobody believed us. Not one person. They thought we didn't feel like driving all the way back to pick them up, so we made up a story to get out of it. The guy who had invited us all over originally said if we were serious, then we needed to go file a police report. So we went to file the report at the state trooper's office. When we filed the report, after giving our story to the trooper, he told us to wait and then he left the room. About 15 minutes later, he came back and told us to tell the truth. Confused, we asked him what he meant. He said his theory was that we were drunk and driving around late at night after Cinco de Mayo. We plowed into the van we described. He said he thought the owner heard that happen and came out and confronted us, so we took off. He said to get ahead of the story, we made up the whole thing so we wouldn't get in trouble for wrecking into a car while drunk and leaving the scene. We reportedly told him it was not the case, and he said everything we told him was true. Without evidence to prove his theory, he let us go. The next day we went and checked the area we showed him on the map. I guess when he didn't find a wrecked car, he knew we were more likely telling the truth. He called and asked us to come meet him out here to verify it was the area, but we told him we don't want to go anywhere near that area again. About 2 weeks after that, he called and asked us to possibly come in and identify the vehicle. He showed us a picture of the red minivan with fog lights, and we said it looked like the vehicle from the incident. He then told us the vehicle was stolen out of Nenana, Alaska, sometime before that, and it was stolen from an old woman. These guys may or may not have been related to her. The trooper said if any arrests were made, he would call us back. We never heard any follow-up after that. To this day, no one believes their story. They think we did something to provoke the incident, or just think we made it up all together to sound cool or something. But it was just a case of wrong place, wrong time. I'm 26 with a husband and 2 kids. My husband's name is Jack, and I have a 6-year-old son, James, and a 3-year-old daughter named Danielle. We live a normal life with not many strange things to talk about. My son gets straight A's and was recently named Student of the Year for his first grade class. You could say our family is about as ordinary as it gets. Living in Denver is sometimes nice, but sometimes I wish we could afford to move to give our kids a better future. About 2 weeks ago, I was tucking in the little ones. I just finished reading their bedtime stories to them when I heard a knock on the door. It was only 7:45. I wasn't expecting Jack to get home until closer to 9. James peered out of his bedroom window since it was just above the front door. He looked down and then spun around. "Mommy, there's 2 kids outside. I don't think we know 'em." He shot me an innocent but confused look. He looked back out the window and then said, "Never mind, Mommy. They left." I thought maybe they were just some kids pulling a prank. I finished putting James and Danielle into their beds and turned off all the upstairs lights. I headed downstairs to follow my nightly routine. I'd usually clean the dishes from dinner and watch TV until Jack got home. I'd been on the couch for about an hour watching TV, and the dishes were clean and the kids were silent. Jack would be home any minute. I reached for my phone and read it's 9:03. As my eyes scanned my phone screen, I heard a knock on the door. Just four little quiet knocks. I got up and looked out the people and I didn't see anything. My phone started ringing, so I ran to grab it. It was from Jack. Hey babe, is everything okay? When will you be home? I asked. I'm already home, but I was a little worried. Are the kids in bed? I paused. Yeah, they've been sound asleep for a while. There's a long pause between us. Then who are the two kids at the front door? Three more little knocks came from the door. I had almost forgotten that anyone had knocked. Ma'am, we know you're in there. We need help. We lost our mom. Jack could hear him through the phone. Don't open the door. Something's wrong. Jack, I think they need help. No. They've been there since before I pulled in the driveway 5 minutes ago. They haven't once looked away from the door. If they needed help, they would have come for me in my car. I walked slowly back to the door to try and see them. I heard a quick few knocks, much harder than the last few. Miss, we can hear you. Me and my sister are cold. Won't you help us and let us in? It was late spring. There's no way someone could gain pity for being cold. I calmly reached my face to the people. Do you see them now? They're right there, Jack yelled through the phone. No, I can't see them yet. 1 second. I was so short that I grabbed a kitchen chair and tried again. Let us in! The child who had been doing the talking started yelling. I looked through the people again, and I heard Jack on the phone, but I had set it down so I couldn't quite understand what he was saying. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The two faces were right there, one older boy and a little girl. Both looked to be ages of my kids. Both of their eyes pierced through me. They were solid black. I gasped and stepped off the chair. I grabbed my phone and told Jack about their eyes. He paused and he decided he couldn't help us until they left. He explained that his grandmother had always warned him of the black-eyed children. You never let them in, try to ignore them. Never help them with whatever they ask for help with. They'll eventually go away, but if you invite them in, we don't know what happens. I wanted to run upstairs to be with my kids, but I knew I should also guard the door. I walked into the kitchen while Jack told me more about them. I began closing curtains and checking locks in all the windows and the back door. Wait, they're moving. I think they're leaving. As soon as I can't see them anymore, I want you to open the door and I'm going to run in, Jack said with excitement. I said okay as I continued closing the curtains and turning the locks. They're near the back of the house now. I'm going to bolt. Are you ready? I paused and asked Jack to repeat himself. As he ended that sentence a second time, I turned to the window above the kitchen sink. As to the backside of the house, two sets of eyes glared back at me. I dropped the phone and I stood there. It was probably about 5 seconds later that I heard my husband frantically knocking at the front door. The children were still as glass. They didn't budge. I spun around and ran as fast as I could to the door to let Jack in. He rushed in, slammed the door, then locked every lock and shoved the kitchen chair underneath the knob. I went back to the kitchen and they were gone. We both ran to every window on both floors and shut the curtains. I went into my son's room and locked down outside of his window. I saw both of the kids staring back at me. We will get in, I heard in my ear whispered. I spun around. I saw no one, and the kids were gone. I hadn't seen them since, and I'm glad my husband knew not to open the door. If I had, I'm not sure you'd ever hear about it. Okay, so I just told a story of a ghost I saw when I was 15 and a comment to another post, but I figured I would post another story instead of making it a comment, so here it goes. We moved into a house when I was about 10 years old. There's nothing special about the house, but I got the room in the basement, which was way bigger than my older room, so I was thrilled. That didn't last long. The very first night we slept there, come bedtime, I headed to my room. As soon as I got to the stairs, I instantly regretted picking the room. It was dark, secluded, and it freaked me out all night. I made my way downstairs and climbed into bed. I fell asleep and woke up at about 2 to 3 a.m. to hear a girl sobbing. It scared me so badly, but it was coming from the side of the room the door was on, so I dare not make a run for it. The crying went on for about 5 to 10 minutes more, and then slowly wound down. I finally calmed myself and went back to sleep. This happens every night for months. I don't want to tell my parents, so I asked my brother to sleep in the room with me. Every time he slept in my room, not a sound. It's frustrating, but weird enough, I finally got used to it. Sometimes I wouldn't even wake up, but I knew deep down it was occurring while I slept. Then a few months later, I started dreaming of a girl in a wedding dress, but it looks like she was in a car accident. She was disfigured and scary as hell to me. She would always be sitting holding something, but in the dream I was too scared to look. This dream also kept reoccurring for quite some time until the sound in the dream were every night events. This goes on, and as time passes it bothered me less. Then, one night I wake up and hear the same sobbing. I roll over and try to go back to sleep, but before I can, I notice the cry is starting to switch. It slowly goes from crying to a deranged laughter. It scared me badly for some reason. I panicked, got up, and ran toward the door, even though it's toward the sound. I get to the door and it sounds like it's right next to me. I don't know if the door was locked or if I was panicking too much, but I couldn't get it open. I started screaming and screaming. I hear the sound of my parents' footsteps running through the house, and then I hear them running down the stairs. And at that time, I'm in complete panic. The door starts shaking like they're trying to open it. As this is happening, I can feel someone grab my arm and I lose my shit. I'm ripping at the door to try and get it open with my parents on the other side. I get it to finally open, expecting my dad on the other side, but nobody's there. The door is open, so I ran upstairs screaming and crying. Now I'm upstairs and my parents hear me and come out of their bedroom. I told them everything and they kinda just looked lost. I told them I'd never go back down there again, and they let me start sleeping in the living room. I never heard it again and never went back downstairs. Months later we moved and I kinda got over it, but that was one of the scariest moments ever. So to put this in perspective, the time this event took place, I was an 18-year-old male fresh out of high school and had been working at my first job. I didn't work during high school since I wanted to focus on my studies and schoolwork, and also who cared about getting a good night's sleep. I was working at a sportswear store and I worked in the footwear section. It was getting closer to the holidays, and the store had more customers flowing through trying to get gifts for their loved ones and friends. During the flow of the people, I did notice one guy who stood out from the rest. He was an older gentleman who had a short, unkempt gray beard with a trucker's hat and a sportsman jacket, and also looked to be 300 plus pounds. He was kind of hard to miss. I don't think much of him as I continued helping other customers find whatever footwear they needed. That's when he approached me. He asked if I could recommend any good boots for hunting or hiking, which I kindly did, and I pointed him into the direction of outdoor footwear, and he carried on. He returned about 10 minutes later, trying to strike up a conversation, talking about his hunting and hiking experiences, which I overall related to since I grew up in a hunting family and I enjoyed it. The conversation seemed harmless enough, but took a weird and unexpected turn when he asked me if I had a boyfriend, which was odd to me. I said no, and I just wasn't into men, just women. He looked a little upset by this, and said that his 19-year-old son had just come out as gay and was looking for a boyfriend. I'll admit I was a little creeped out, but tried to be as polite as possible, and as it was store policy, and I wished his son luck on finding the right guy before moving on to do my job. As the day continued, I noticed that I kept seeing the guy over and over passing by the footwear aisle like he was doing laps around the store. He would glance over and flash me a smile like he hadn't just done it 3 times before that. Soon the day came to an end, and I made my way towards my truck in the parking lot. It was around 6 p.m., and with it being winter, it was pretty much dark already. Thankfully, the parking lot was well lit, which made the walks to my truck a little more comfortable. The next day, as I was doing my own thing in the footwear section, I once again saw the man. He entered the store and almost immediately made his way to my section. He greeted me and I asked what I could do for him. He didn't seem at all interested in buying any sort of footwear though, and just started talking about his life. He said he had gotten divorced from his wife a few years ago and his son was living with him. After a little while, once again, asking me questions like, have you ever thought about getting together with a guy? Or, have you ever been attracted to any sort of guy? I kindly but assertively stated that I have never been into guys and I'm happy being straight. I even lied saying that I had a girlfriend, hoping he wouldn't ask me any more questions. What he did next shocked me though. He grabbed me on both shoulders and said that I need to explore and get out there more, that life is short and I need to try new things. I immediately felt uncomfortable by this and got him to let go of my shoulders. I said goodbye to him and went to do anything to get away from the guy. He just walked away without saying anything. All throughout the day I kept noticing him, whether it was from an aisle or two just giving a stare at me. When I caught his gaze, he would immediately turn away. I got bad vibes from the guy and just tried to avoid him. The rest of the day went smoothly, occasionally seeing the man, but overall just focusing on my job at hand. Soon it came to the time that I got to go home. I had stopped by the bathroom really quick, as it was a 30-minute drive home for me. I didn't feel like holding it the entire time. I situated myself at a urinal when I heard the bathroom door open. Being it was late, it was only me and the unknown person who were in the bathroom. I stayed focused on myself, and I didn't notice the footsteps of the man stopped abruptly near me, as if he was waiting for me to turn. There were multiple urinals, which was odd. Once I flushed, I turned around and was greeted by the man from earlier, just staring at me, not moving or making any noise, just staring. I was immediately creeped out by this and made my way out of the bathroom, not washing my hands, not wanting to be in the same room with this guy. As I made my way to the bathroom door, the man made no attempt to use the urinal or anything, just stood there staring at me as I made my way out. I did walk up to the manager and tell him about the creepy guy. Wanting to be on the safe side, I asked if he could walk with me to my truck. I had no clue on what the guy's intentions were. He agreed and happily walked with me to my truck where we said goodbye. And that was it. I never saw the man again, and he never came back to the store or anything. Just stopped coming altogether. I still work at the same store, but have been placed in a new area of the store working in the apparel area. And I haven't seen him since, and I'm glad. So, fat creepy guy with the trucker hat, let's not meet again. So, this happened when I was 19 or 20. I'm 31 now. Rarely drink or go out anymore. But last weekend, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a couple of years asked me out, and we ended up going to a club on the same street where this story takes place, which is what reminded me of it. The legal age in Brazil for drinking is 18, so people here start partying pretty early. And let's face it, no one really knows their limits when they start drinking. My friends and I had gone to this club. Honestly, I can't remember the name now, but I know it closed down a couple years back. We had a great time, and the sun was coming up as we were leaving. Most clubs give you a credit card when you walk in, where you either put in the money you plan on spending, or they work as a personal digital tab, where bartenders add up what you're drinking and you pay for it on the way out. So I paid for my stuff and I sat outside to wait for my friends, who were taking a long time to come out, probably because they were drunk. As I'm sitting there, I notice a car across the street. Two guys in the front seat, and one out of the car trying to make this clearly drunk out of her mind girl get inside as well. She's mumbling, stumbling, struggling to keep her eyes open and saying, "No, I don't want to go," over and over, shaking her head, clinging onto the door as a guy keeps telling her, "Let's go, get in. They're just trying to go to a friend's apartment and drink some more. Come on, it'll be fun." I watch, wondering if I should do something, if no one else is seeing this happening. I look at the club's security guard, and he looks at me and shrugs, like it's not his responsibility. I look back at the girl, and I'm really uncomfortable, and also scared. My friends are still nowhere to be seen. I'm alone, and the security guard is clearly not doing anything, and there's three guys. What if they decide to try and get me too? The girl says one more time that she doesn't want to go with them, and before I realize what I'm doing, I'm getting to my feet and shouting, "Hey!" The guy stops trying to push the girl into the car for a moment and looks at me. "She says she doesn't want to go, dude," I say, starting to make my way across the street, even though my hands are shaking and my voice is probably not the most convincing. "She's our friend. She's just drunk and being cranky. It's all good. We're going to take her home," he says. He seems a bit nervous and not exactly angry, which makes me feel a little bit better and less scared. "Do you know them?" I asked her, and she just shakes her head no, using the door as support to keep herself on her feet. Creep number one, the one who was trying to push her into the car, looks at me, and then to his friends who seem frustrated, but start saying, "Come on, man, let's go, just leave it." Creep number one, now looking a bit pissed off, grabs a girl and pushes her towards me before getting into the car, and they all drive off. The girl nearly fell on her face, but I grabbed her and we walked back to the front of the club, my heart slowly going back to its normal rate. Only then I realized my friends had come out and were watching everything from across the street with confused faces. We all meet random people at clubs, at the door, walking down the street, so they probably thought I just met someone. I start asking her what happened, if she's alone, where's all of her stuff, and she's an incoherent mess, mumbling about losing track of her friends, her purse. She doesn't even know how she paid for her tab to leave. I asked for some help from the security guard, and he says he can't leave a spot or he can't do anything. I explained what happened to my friends, and they talked to the hostess about it, who begrudgingly goes and checks the lost and found. Her purse is thankfully there, minus the money she had in her wallet, and we managed to call her parents. I talked to her mom because the girl can't explain anything, and I promised to stay there until the mom comes to pick her up. 30 minutes later, the mom arrives, and I've never seen someone look so relieved and terrified at the same time. She thanks me and my friends profusely and offers us a ride home. But as we lived in the next town over, she just drives us to the subway station. In the middle of all the craziness, I forgot to exchange numbers with any of them, so I've never heard of that girl or her mom again. But I hope she learned to be more careful with how much she has to drink or who she talks to in the clubs. Also, shame on her friends for not looking out for her, or trying to find her when they realized she was missing. Though maybe they were all just as drunk as she was, but who knows. I know what I did was probably a bit reckless, but I wouldn't be able to just watch the car drive away and live with myself. Please be safe when going out, and creeps at the nightclub who are trying to take advantage of drunk girls, let's never meet again. This isn't something personally that I experienced, but more something that a good chunk of my family had been there for, something that my brothers have witnessed, and the looks on their face tell me how true it all is. My cousin had been playing around with the Ouija board and other dark things in the house. He stayed with my aunt and her husband. Both my brothers visited often to hang out with our cousin. The activity started out small. They would leave the living room and come back to the pillows being moved around on the couches, papers on the coffee table now on the floor, or found the dining room table. One night, a small activity turned into something much more dangerous. My brothers always talked about how they felt negative in that house, but they never thought much of it until one night. My aunt's husband snapped. I don't know all the details, of course, but out of nowhere, he broke my aunt's arms, my brothers and cousin trying to hold him back. Now, normally, just one of my brothers, reaching close to 6 feet tall and playing football and basketball for years, could hold a skinny 5'6" man back. But this night, the three of them were struggling. He was speaking words that made no sense, leaning his body back in a way he had never seen before, eyes rolling in the back of his head. In the chaos, one of them called the cops. By the time the cops arrived, he had stopped, and they had him in handcuffs. Not a single person had an injury, other than my aunt's broken arm, of course, but no open wounds. Yet the living room was covered in blood. The cops were confused and searched the house to make sure there wasn't another person they hadn't been told about who was hurt, but no one else was there. No one was bleeding. They couldn't explain how the blood got there or even whose it was. That night, my cousin came forward about his experiments in his room, and my aunt made him throw it all out, making him promise to never do it in the house again. And as far as I know, they never had any other problems in that house before they moved. My aunt's husband was released and had no memory of what happened that night, just remembering coming to and being in handcuffs, and he's never done anything that aggressive ever again. It was a strange night, and I remember the commotion of my mom on the phone with my aunt after everything happened, and my brother sitting in the living room, shaking as they told us, and even though I wasn't there that night, I fully believe my cousins had invited something dark into their home, and my aunt's husband had gotten possessed. Hey, my name is Kasha, but my friends call me Cash. The story I'm about to tell you is based on true events that took place when I was a teenager. I'm 30 years old now, and this experience still gives me chills before I go to bed at night. Growing up, it was always four people living around my home: my mother, me, and my two brothers. Around 2007, me and my family moved into a housing complex a few blocks from our old house. Odd things would happen in our apartment, but nothing really that couldn't be debunked. I would always try to convince myself with some reasoning before freaking out. Me and my family really never discussed ghosts or paranormal things, but we knew it was real. One night while getting ready for school the next morning, I just decided to turn on my TV and lay down while checking my social media. My mom was in her room and the door was shut, as well as my brothers sleeping in their room. I've always kept my door shut because open doors at night just creep me out. While on my phone, I felt myself dozing off, so I decided to call it a night and go to sleep. Once my phone was away and on the charger, I turned to lay on my side and fell asleep soundly. Around 2 a.m., I know it was 2 because I check my phone whenever I wake up. I needed to go to the bathroom. All the lights in the apartment were off, and I quickly returned to my room and shut my door. Climbed into my cozy bed and tried falling back to sleep. I started to doze off again, slowly feeling myself drifting back to sleep, and then suddenly I felt someone or something gently sit at the foot of my bed. I froze immediately. I was so scared. I couldn't even scream, so I just stayed turned on my side, praying whatever was in my room would leave. Then I started to hear whispers. I kid you not, it sounded like there were multiple people in my room whispering amongst each other. I started to plan an escape, and I wanted to muster enough courage to get the hell out of there, but my prayers turned into muffled whimpers, when all of a sudden, I heard clear as day, "Shh, you're gonna wake her up." I don't know where the strength came, but I jumped out of my bed and ran straight to my mother's room and got into bed with her. When she woke up and was asking, "What's wrong with you?" Keep in mind, I'm 16 years old and jumping into my mother's bed like a little girl. I explained to her there was something in my room, and I was telling her this as I glanced over at the door and saw this huge shadowy mass just standing there and looking at me. I screamed. My mother cut her light on and asked, "What the hell is going on?" I told her there was a shadow man standing by the door. She said there's nothing there and to just go to bed. That night I slept in her bed because I refused to go to my room. The next morning, after my brothers left for day camp, we were sitting in the dining room having breakfast when she decided to come out and say she'd seen the shadow man I was talking about before that night. My jaw dropped, and she said that she's seen him a few times before while me and my brothers were at school, and one time at night in the kitchen. She then opened up about her coming home to all the cabinets being opened with no explanation and strange knocking. Since that day, I knew it wasn't me being crazy. This was something real and spiritually connected to the property, a haunting that still gives me creeps to this day. Now, I know what you're thinking, that I don't really have sleep paralysis, but that I'm simply being haunted by a ghost. I wish it was as simple as that. See, the truth is, this thing has been haunting me ever since I was a child. My therapist says that it's unresolved trauma from losing my mother at a young age that first started my sleep paralysis. My mom's death broke my father, and he just became a shell of himself. We had no extended family, and I was left to deal with my issues alone. Being so young, I had no idea what was happening to me, and my dad was in no position to help, only looking at me with disgust every time I would tell him about the little girl in my bedroom. He thought I was just asking for attention, but I was genuinely scared out of my mind most nights, so I just learned to shut up about all of it. If I had known what was happening to me, I would also have known how to deal with it. So, simple things like breathing deeply, calming yourself, wiggling your toes had to be learnt by me through trial and error over the years. You cannot imagine the sense of relief I felt when I discovered what sleep paralysis was when a friend was telling me a scary story. It became a lot easier after that, knowing that it was just a condition and not a monster. I learned to deal with it. Time passed and I grew up, and my nightmares became less and less frequent. Fell in love, got married, and had a beautiful daughter despite my many psychological issues. Having the love of my life next to me every night pretty much cured me of paralysis, although I still had some attacks every now and then. But then my daughter grew up and my life turned to hell as her face became more and more familiar. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. My therapist said it was just old issues rearing their ugly head, and that I was projecting my daughter's face onto my nightmares. But I know better. I lived with that face, and that face haunted me all of my life. There's no way I would ever make a mistake like that. My trust in my therapist nosedived, and so did all the progress I had made. My reaction to this development was the absolute worst. I started pulling away from my daughter. It's a horrible thing for a father to admit, but being near that face was turning into a debilitating experience. I started getting into fights with my wife, and she couldn't understand why I was pulling away like that. Not showing up for recitals, spending less and less time with her, and slowly turning into a workaholic. It all came to a head when I missed her 10th birthday to go on a work trip that I didn't really need to go on. My daughter was crying harder than ever before, and my wife was absolutely furious. The fight we had that day was the worst of our married life. For a second there, I thought that was it, and this would be what kills our marriage. But I managed to convince her that I'll try harder after returning to just give me another chance. I still remember that night. It's burnt into my memory, every second of it. There she was in her pink dress, standing at the corner of my bed. I tried to wiggle my toes and everything that one is supposed to do in this situation, but that night was different because for the first time in my life she moved. I laid there, stunned, and she slowly climbed the bed and began to crawl over me without making a single sound. I tried to move, I tried to scream, but I was frozen solid. I felt her cold skin on me as she slowly made her way up. Her eyes were bottomless black pits that threatened to suck my soul. When she was directly above me, she opened her mouth in a wordless scream, and a sharp slash appeared on her throat, with dark red blood gushing out and splashing all over my chest. A couple seconds later, I came out of the attack with a violent jerk, and the only wetness left on my chest was my own sweat. I actually cried that night. For the first time since my mother's death, I sobbed like a baby. I needed professional help more than what I was getting. Even if it meant checking into a mental hospital, I needed to do it if I had any chance of saving my family. But I'd never get that chance. A phone call in the early morning destroyed my life. See, while I was dealing with my sleep paralysis, some piece of shit broke into my home. He shot my wife and then violated my daughter before slitting her throat. I didn't even get a chance at seeking revenge. They arrested him within 12 hours, and DNA evidence made sure he was put away for life. All I was left with was the pain and regret and guilt I felt. If I hadn't gone away that night, if I had just stayed home, I could have protected them. My daughter was calling for me that night, and I failed her. I let my weakness get the better of me, and I lost everything dear to me. My nightmares have gotten worse, and every night she stands there looking at me, wondering why I didn't protect her. I'm so sorry, baby, I'm coming to you. Now, before I end it all, I just want to leave you with this message. If it looks like your sleep paralysis demon is trying to tell you something, pay attention. So back when I was around the age of 14, I lived with my dad, two older brothers, and my older sister in a small house we used to call the greenhouse. It had a fairly big backyard for 4 blue-nosed pits to enjoy, and a regular-sized front yard, but a small living space inside the house. Although old, it was a cozy place and felt quite welcoming as a whole. Anyway, one night all my siblings were in the boys' room, my other brother's room, playing on their PS3, and I for some reason didn't want to be in there, so I went to the living room, which is right outside their room. I say for some reason because when I was younger, I was scared of being alone in the dark, so it was unusual for me to do. All the lights were off in all the rooms, and I was sitting on the couch playing with my sister's Nintendo DS. I was playing a SpongeBob game, and that was my only source of light. I'm sitting in the corner, and to the left of me is my brother's room, and straight in front of me is the doorway to the kitchen. In the middle of playing the DS, I just pointed the screen at the doorway of the kitchen to light it up so I could see, but there was nothing. It wasn't like a forced impulse that made me point the light, but more of an unconscious movement. After no more than 20 seconds had passed, I had done it again and pointed my sister's DS at the doorway, but this time I saw her. She was a young girl crawling on her hands and feet across the doorway, upside down on my ceiling. She had long black hair that dangled, her eyes were dark red, but her body was extremely pale, and it looked as if her body glowed a bit. She stopped in the middle of the doorway like a deer caught in the headlights. I could see her whole body, and she turned her head and made eye contact. I don't know how long I stared at her emotionless, but after some time, I shot my hand down to hide the light, and after a few seconds, I pointed it back and she was gone. I remember I kept asking myself over and over again, why didn't she scare me? Why didn't I feel scared when we were making eye contact? Why? It confused me a lot. After sitting there for a bit, I called out for my sisters to go to the kitchen and turn on the light. The light switch was right under the spot the little girl was crawling around. She was skeptical, but went and turned it on anyways. After she did, I got up to investigate, but after finding nothing, I confessed to what had just happened. I know it was really messed up for me to send my sister in there blindly, but I hope you can understand that I was worried afterward and needed comfort and reassurance from the light. To this day, I believe she was a good spirit or ghost because I felt no fear while looking at her, just emptiness. I don't think she meant any harm, and I've never seen her again. However, there have been many more paranormal events, just not in the greenhouse. It was 4:30 p.m. on October 26th this past Saturday when my 6-year-old son and I pulled into the parking lot of our local park. We found a spot and joined the rest of the people who had volunteered to participate in our town's annual trunk or treat that day. A little background on us, so that things make a little more sense. I'm 22 years old, so I had Hayden at 16. His father wasn't the best towards me, and is quite honestly a pathetic piece of shit. So I damn well was not going to let him hurt my son. I have full custody of him, for good reasons. I am a good mom. I protected him from the moment I discovered that I was pregnant, okay? Being a single parent isn't easy, alright? But it is not impossible. My mom and dad have always been super supportive of me and have helped wherever they can. The only issue and roadblock we've run into is the fact that, well, Halen isn't like other little boys. He wants dolls and girly things for his birthday and for Christmas. He wants to wear mommy's makeup and wear dresses. And you know what? I let him. Despite my Christian parents' disapproval, I buy him whatever doll he wants and clothes that he likes. Because, I mean, hey, I've always been a tomboy and I got all the trucks, action figures, and video games that I wanted, so why can't my son be into what he wants? Why is there a double standard? I'm sorry, it just really pisses me off because since what happened Saturday, everyone's blaming me and calling me a horrible parent, because I apparently allowed my son to look like a sissy, in their words, and that's why it was taken. And granted, he hasn't come out and told me that he wants to be a girl. So he does identify as a boy, and quite honestly, I don't care whether he does or not because he's my child and I love him. And we're from a tiny town in Alabama, of all places, mind you. So you can imagine all the looks we got whenever Halen and I got out of the truck, with him dressed like a character Mercy from Overwatch. My son has naturally blonde hair like mine, so he spent all year growing it out just for his costume. It was his dream to be Mercy, he said. I ordered his costume custom made and all. It was sick. The wings and the staff had lights, and it was amazing. My hair is dyed gray, so I went with being a gender bent soldier 76. My costume, custom made as well. We let down the tailgate, set up our little decorations, and had our bowls of candy ready by 5. When the kids started pouring into trick or treat, we were towards the end of the parking lot, so it took a minute for us to get any kids. But it was worth the wait. My little man, standing in the bed of the truck, waving his staff around and shouting Mercy's emotes, was the cutest thing on earth. You couldn't pay me any amount of money to miss that moment. It was just pure, unbridled happiness. And that right there is why I don't give a shit about what anyone else says or thinks about how I raise him. Here and there, Halen would see some of his classmates from school, and they would get excited to see one another. Some of them were also dressed up as Overwatch characters, and I got the cutest picture of them all together. Their parents also got some snaps of Halen and I, then a big group photo of everyone together in costume. He naturally got deflated though, whenever his friends were going off to get candy while he stayed behind with me. Halen begged and begged me to allow him to go with his friends and their parents. Now, once again, I'm overprotective of my son. He goes nowhere without me for good reason. But after some talking with a few of the parents, they convinced me that he would be safe with them. They have my cell, Facebook, Instagram, everything. If they needed me, they very well could reach me. I kissed Halen on the forehead and adjusted his costume for him and set him off. I sat on the tailgate and passed out more candy for about 30 minutes or so. Occasionally, I would look up, and if I peered hard enough, I could still see Halen's glowing staff and wings in the distance in any direction. It honestly made me glad that he was wearing such a gaudy costume. For another more important reason, as you'll find out soon enough. Because the first time in the past half an hour I couldn't see him anymore. I scanned around frantically, looking as hard as I could. Wings and staff, wings and staff. I kept repeating out loud over and over, completely disregarding the family in front of me. The parents asked me if everything was okay, and I told them I couldn't see my son anymore. I described what he was wearing to him and explained he was supposed to be with his friend's parents. I began to panic and scrambled for my cell phone. As soon as I pulled it out of my pocket, I saw I already had 2 missed calls, then another came through. It was Derek, his friend Juno's dad. When I answered, I gave him no time to speak and immediately asked, "Where is my son?" And his answer put my stomach in knots. "I don't know." He apologized repeatedly, and I began walking around frantically calling out my son's name while remaining on the phone with Derek. I cursed him over and over again until I was nearly out of breath. I continued walking and screaming. At this point, everything had come to a halt. Everyone was actively searching for my son. The police had already been contacted multiple times by this point. The dispatcher was surely overwhelmed by the number of calls they were receiving. Everything was happening so quickly, so I'm not sure how much time had gone by at this point, but I remember specifically seeing out of the corner of my eye a white 2000s Toyota Camry lights cut on. It was the edge of the parking lot by the entrance. My stomach churned and my entire body shook. I feared the worst. It slowly crept forward and turned towards the entrance. And in the back seat, I saw it. The wings and the staff. Up until this point, I had never known how I would react in a situation like this, but I'm glad that I was the scream and go crazy type. If I had froze up, this person could have gotten away with my son. Because I seemed to be the only person who noticed the car, I completely lost it. "There, white Camry, in the back," I screamed at the top of my lungs, with what I had left of my voice as I sprinted to the truck. I jumped in, I turned on the ignition and floored it. No seatbelt, I didn't close the tailgate, the bowl of candy flew everywhere. I say that I floored it, meaning I went forward. I was parked at the dead end of the parking lot, but facing the main road, so I drove straight up over the curb and onto the grass, then over the sidewalk before landing onto the pavement of the main road. The police were taking way too long, and I feel like even if they were there, I would have still done this. I was a few cars behind the Camry, and I was honking and swerving wildly behind them. This went on for all of 3 minutes of driving down the winding road before each of them pulled off onto the side of the road. They probably thought I was insane, but I honestly was at that point. I was prepared to tear whoever had my kid apart limb by limb. Once I was behind the Camry, I could clear as day see my son in the back seat turned around and banging on the back window, and no amount of time or healing is going to remove that horrifying image from my brain. The car swerved violently as I saw whoever it was reach from behind the driver's seat and rip Halen away from where he was. It was right there I made the hasty and dangerous decision. I was easily going 60 miles an hour down this winding road, 25 miles over the limit, which meant they were going just slightly faster. I could continue this chase and crash at some point. Hopefully the police find us mid-chase before we did, or I could just run the car off the road into the ditch myself. With my son in the car, knowing he wasn't wearing a seatbelt and risking his injuries. Or worst case, the person could get completely away. It was a split-second choice, but I took my chances. I slammed the gas and carefully pulled up alongside the Camry on the driver's side. I pit maneuvered them, sending the car spinning out into the oncoming lane, barely missing a black Hyundai. The driver failed to regain control and landed in the ditch. I immediately pulled over to the side and sprinted to the car. I noticed the owner of the Hyundai pulled over as well and jumped out demanding to know what was going on. I was hysterical, still making my way to the crashed Toyota, explaining as best as I could that my son had been kidnapped. The man quickly ran back to his car and called for me to wait, to watch the car and make sure no one had gotten out. I halted and waited for a moment but grew impatient. I began running to the car, unable to take it, knowing my kid was trapped in there. The man screamed at me as I neared the crash, and just as I reached the back left passenger door, the driver's door flew open. A large, dirty man grabbed me by my hair and smashed my head into the side of the car. I fell, barrel rolling down into the ditch as I heard 2 gunshots being fired. Warning shots, I now assume. Then, after a moment, the third shot was fired before there was an agonizing scream, followed by the sound of metal being dropped on the concrete. I gathered myself and stood back up as I heard police sirens approaching. The man who had just assaulted me and stolen my child from me, to do God knows what with him, was now laying on the ground, clutching his leg in a pool of blood forming beneath him. And as fucked up as it sounds, I couldn't have been happier to see him like that. I caught myself standing there for a moment watching him suffer. A swarm of police cars blocked off the area from both sides of the road as I limped around to the door again. I pulled on the handle, but it was locked. I reached to the inside of the driver's door and unlocked it. I could see Halen laying on his side in the back seat, covering his face with his hands. When I pulled open the door and called his name, he sat up in an instant. I could tell that he was in pain from his expression alone. He had a superficial cut on the side of his face, but other than that, he didn't seem too seriously injured. I pulled him into my arms and kissed the side of his head. I picked him up and carried him back to the truck where we sat on the tailgate. I was being careful to steer his sight away from the man on the ground who was being put into cuffs before having his leg treated by 2 officers. We sat on the tailgate and spoke to the officer, giving every detail. It was found out later this man had lured my son into his car by posing as a trunk-or-treat volunteer who had run out of candy. The man told him that if he accompanied him, he would get a special treat. A story that a naive 6-year-old would believe, and I didn't even want to think about what his true intentions were. So this happened when I was about 15, and I was out hunting with my father and one of his friends from work. We'll call him Frank for the purpose of the story, who was a lot more experienced with hunting than we were. It was an archery javelina hunt nearby the Crown King. We got pretty lucky coming up on a squadron of javelina as we were driving to our campsite, so we stalked them for a while and Frank managed to get a shot on one, but lost it in the brush after following a blood trail for a few hours. After a failed attempt of searching, we made our way back to our designated campsite and set up. It was around 3 in the afternoon, so we decided to just call it a day there. That night, I laid in my sleeping bag with my father, as Frank slept in a separate tent next to ours. It was a quiet night, which is to be expected since the deserts of Arizona usually are very quiet. I woke up around what I would assume to be like 1 in the morning, hearing walking around our tent. Figuring it may be a javelina or maybe even a deer, I just laid there listening, waiting for it to go away. One sound broke the silence, and it scared the shit out of me. Clear as day, right outside of our tent, you could hear a loud back, like someone yelling for someone to back away. It was aggressive and caught the attention of my father, who then stayed quiet. The silence resumed again, and maybe another 30 seconds later, almost like a recording on a tape recorder, we heard it again. Back. In different circumstances, we would have walked out to see what was going on. But everything was too quiet. No struggling like a guy fighting a man or an animal, just him yelling back. This continued for maybe another 5 minutes, him occasionally yelling again. But as the yells got quieter and we knew the man walked away, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there in silence, looking at the zipper to our sleeping bag, half expecting someone to start unzipping it. Thankfully, that never happened. It had to be near an hour before someone finally broke the silence, and that was my father. What the fuck? We didn't leave the tent till we could clearly see the sun in the sky before we heard Frank exit his tent before saying the coast was clear, him obviously being awoken from the whole incident. He looked and just as shaken up as we did. We started a fire and my father drank some coffee, and we just stood there in silence, still trying to comprehend what we had just heard a few hours ago. Frank had finally pipped up about it and said, "I saw it. The fucker had to be 7 feet tall." Unlike our tent, Frank's tent was more summer and made for a bigger bug net than a tent. You could clearly see out of the top since it was nothing more than a visor. That was how he saw it. After a little bit of thinking, we decided to end our hunt there, seeing how I was pretty shaken up by this, and I really didn't feel comfortable about being out there. A few years had passed, and I'm 18 at this point, and my family and Frank had gotten together to talk and hang out. At this point, he told me something he hadn't said on the trip, trying not to scare me. He said that when he saw it, its face was pale white like computer paper, and was at least 7 or 8 feet tall.